Good afternoon, ladies and gents. It is the 16th of July 2024, and today we're going to be talking about a subject that is so important and critical. You'll need to kind of understand this really. We'll discuss kind of what happens when a nuclear strike has either been sort of threatened or is imminent to your country. Looking at the warnings you're likely to receive, we'll look at home shielding or shielding your home, bugging out to an alternative building such as an office block or similar. We'll go through the halving process and what that means to your sort of protection when you're sort of shielding yourself using different materials, that is. I will show you some sort of personal protection NBC kit that I've kind of invested in for me and my family. I'll quickly go through my home shielding plan. So I'll just tell you what my plan is if I ever need to sort of shield this home. And a very quick mention of dose meters, which are those handheld radioactive material detection devices. So quite a lot to go through. It's an overview, so we're not going to go into any of this too deeply. But I'll try and sort of summarize as much as I can without sort of missing out any of that critical data. I'm going to just throw up again, as per normal, with these first 14 videos, just slides, just giving you some information. I know it's not very entertaining, but I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to sort of give you critical and important sort of information just to allow you to better understand those threats that could or if they have any kind of impact on you and your family. Apologies in advance, as there's like I say, quite a lot of detail to sort of get out to you, but I just cannot sort of stress the importance of this subject enough. However, there are some sort of key points that I'm going to sort of raise in this session that will allow you to kind of really just walk away and just look at the threat of nuclear war differently, as we also try and clear up some of these so-called sort of myths and truths as well. I'm not going to lie, only up until a couple of years ago, I was of the believing, actually, like 90% of the world's population, that if there was a nuclear war, then we're all pretty much fucked. Or even if there was a nuclear bomb going off here in the UK, then we're all doomed. Guys, that actually couldn't be any further from the truth, to be honest with you. And hopefully, some of you would have seen my sort of video on the simulation of nuclear detonations across sort of various counterforce and countervalue targets here in the UK. You should already now know from that session that a 150 kiloton air or ground burst strike on a UK sort of target is not going to kill everyone in this country. I actually sort of tested this mentality a few days ago on my way to the sort of local shop, and I sort of bumped into a mate, and we got talking about the UK election result for what it was worth, and then I sort of got onto the subject of conflict. Well, I switched the subject because I just didn't want to talk about the new batch of government puppets now in power and all of the promises and lies we're likely to sort of hear over the coming months and years. But nevertheless, I said to him, mate, listen, I've got a question for you. If a nuclear bomb drops, let's say in Birmingham right now, what would happen? Do you know what he said to me? He said, yeah, we'd be fucked. Now, we don't even live in Birmingham, but I said to him, what do you mean? What, the whole country? He said, yeah, if a nuclear bomb lands, we're all done. The reason I asked him is because I knew what he was going to say. And it was exactly what I probably would have thought of, not even saying, but it's along the same lines as what I would have been thinking before the Ukraine war back in 2022. However, since then, I have sort of educated myself on these threats. And with that, we end up sort of looking at how to sort of protect ourselves from it. If you've watched, again, like I say, my previous videos, you'll now know the different threats to the UK. If you live in the UK, that's going to be useful to you. So apologies for anyone who's living outside of the UK. I'm going to try and sort of incorporate some of these videos. I'm going to incorporate metrics and information and data and stuff like that for other countries. because that's only fair. You should know from those previous videos the possible targets and impacts, the types of missiles. You'll now know about the UK's defence and deterrent platform. That's including the number of fighter jets and ships and submarines that make up that deterrent. And you'd hopefully have picked up some other sort of useful information along the way. Now, I know, as well as you should know, that a 150 kiloton tactical nuke, either ground burst or air burst, hitting sort of Birmingham, for example, then you know you're more likely know the damage and impact that that would cause and how many casualties and fatalities. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if you have watched these previous videos, and again, I've said it before, but these videos have been sort of published in order sequentially. So ideally, they need to be watched in order. So if you're gonna, don't go in and watch video 7 and then go to video 2 and then go to video 12, and because some of it just won't make sense. So I've released them and I've published them and I've created them in order, because what I'm doing is I'm laying the foundations, and I'm giving you a lot of sort of information based on sort of facts, really, and logic. And those videos are put out there in a logical order. Anyway, enough about that. Um, so I was, what was I saying? Yeah, so you should know that if 150 kiloton tactical nuke sort of hit Birmingham, you're likely to know the impact and the damage, the casualties and fatalities and things like that if you've watched my previous videos. And that would include the 2 videos on using nuke map, where you can simulate sort of detonations, missile detonations above, potential targets. But what you will definitely know is that everyone in the UK would not be fucked, and couldn't be any further from the truth. And with that, we can further sort of help ourselves by understanding the threat in more detail. What is radiation? And fallouts, and what's going to happen to sort of me if I'm sort of exposed to it, as well, of course, how am I going to protect myself from it? So it's okay sort of understanding the types of missiles and the types of defense and deterrents that are out there to hopefully stop this shit from landing on our fucking mainland. But if any of them do, then there's a different threat. You've got the threat of radiation, so we need to understand what that is, what that means, and how we can protect ourselves from it. Moving on. Before we sort of talk about radiation and sort of protecting ourselves from it, I just want to mention some of the terms you'll sort of hear flying around regarding the different types of mass destruction bombs. Let's start with the only 2 atomic bombs ever used during wartime. So in 1945, the Americans dropped a couple of bombs in on Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a 15 kiloton, which the Americans named the Little Boy. And then there was the 20 kiloton for Nagasaki, which they named that bomb the Fat Man. Both of those relied on uranium. And they also relied on sort of plutonium. So they got uranium and plutonium inside for their reactions. Inside the Little Boy were 2 sort of disparate chunks of uranium, each chunk too small actually to reach a critical mass. But at the moment of the detonation, the 2 pieces were sort of fired at one another, triggering a critical mass and deadly explosion. So that's kind of how that worked. The Fat Man, which was the 20 kiloton, the Nagasaki bomb. However, that kind of sort of relied on a less reactive plutonium, and just couldn't, it couldn't use the firing method as to sort of trigger that detonation. So instead, the plutonium was sort of surrounded by a kind of sphere of conventional explosives, which detonated all at once. Excuse me. Sorry. So the powerful sort of implosion compressed the plutoniums, and that kind of sort of basically what that was doing is sort of increasing its density and achieving critical mass. So while they used different materials and methods to achieve critical mass, both the Little Boy and Fat Man were atomic bombs, or that was their category. They were categorized as atomic bombs because they both utilized the fission of sort of heavy atoms to go boom, basically. You've got a thermonuclear bomb. some of you might know as a sort of hydrogen bomb. In contrast to the earlier two atomic bombs there, the thermonuclear bomb, often called the hydrogen bomb, relies on fusion instead of fission. Instead of splitting heavy atoms into lighter ones, fusion works on sort of mushing two light elements into a heavier one. They're commonly called sort of hydrogen bombs because they use hydrogen isotopes, the same stuff used in fusion reactors to fuel them. The explosive power of a thermonuclear bomb can be hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than the atomic bombs. While the force of the bomb sort of dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was sort of measured in kilotons or 1,000 tons of TNT, the force of thermonuclear bombs is measured in megatons, which is 1 million tons. While they are different class of nuclear bombs, thermonuclear bombs often have sort of smaller atomic bombs inside them, and that's because the fusion reaction they need to sort of achieve required incredible amounts of sort of heat and pressure. So that's how that works. Dirty bombs are often spoken of in the same sort of tones as nuclear bombs or nuclear weapons because they do pose the same sort of risk of exposure to radiation. However, they are different from sort of true nuclear weapons in one critical way. While atomic bombs and sort of thermonuclear bombs, they derive their power from the atomic interactions of fission and fusion. A dirty bomb is not so powerful. There aren't any sort of nuclear reactions sort of happening inside the dirty bomb. Instead, they rely on a conventional explosives sort of mixed together with radioactive materials. When the bomb goes off, the radioactive materials are spread throughout a blast zone. Importantly, the blast zone and the sort of downstream fallout is significantly lower than that of a actual nuclear weapon. So, guys, it's just important to understand really some of these metrics. They're the sorts of weapons that could turn your worlds upside down, or if used in other countries and conflict arenas, at least you'll know what people are talking about when they're sort of mentioned. If you hear that a dirty bomb has been used in the Ukraine, then although that is a sort of blow below the belt and additional sort of suffering caused, you'll also know that a dirty bomb is not as threatening as an atomic or nuclear bomb or hydro or thermonuclear bombs. So again, that's why I'm sort of explaining these to you, because if you hear these terms, just understand what they mean. The least damaging is going to be a dirty bomb. Then there's the atomic bomb, similar to those used in Japan. And then you've got your thermo or hydrogen bombs. So in that order. Enough about that. Let's just move on to myths and facts around sort of the dangers of nuclear weapons. I'm just going to give you three myths or two. Let me just give you two myths. Okay, these are well-known myths, and I'm just going to tell you the facts. Fallout radiation, they say, from a nuclear war would poison the air and all parts of the environment. It would kill everyone. And this seems to be pretty much the one that most widespread myths of all. So again, go back to the conversation I had with my mate. What would happen if a nuclear weapon bomb goes off in the UK? Oh, we're all fucked. That's actually not the case. But the fact is, I'm just going to explain to you what actually happens when a nuclear bomb goes off, and then from that you'll know whether everybody's likely to die or not. When a nuclear weapon actually explodes, sorry, I'm moving about, explodes near enough to the ground for its fireball to touch the ground, it forms a crater. Then there's sort of many thousands of tons of earth from the crater of the large sort of explosion. All of that earth is kind of pulverized into trillions of particles. These particles are contaminated by radioactive atoms, which come from the bomb, produced by the nuclear explosion. Thousands of tons of particles are then sort of carried up into that mushroom-shaped cloud that we're all familiar with, miles above the Earth. These radioactive particles then fall out of the mushroom cloud or out of the sort of dispersing cloud of particles blown by the winds, thus becoming fallout. Each contaminated particle continuously gives off an invisible radiation. much like that. They're kind of similar to, let's say, for instance, tiny sort of X-ray machines. While in the mushroom cloud, while descending and after having sort of fallen to Earth, the descending radioactive particles are sort of carried by the winds, like, let's say, the sand and dust particles of I don't know, a mile thick sort of sandstorm cloud, except that they are usually sort of blown at lower speeds. And in many areas, the particles are so sort of far apart that you don't even see a cloud as such. The largest and heaviest fallout particles reach the ground first, obviously because of gravity, in locations normally closer to the explosion. Many smaller particles are carried by the winds for tens to thousands of miles before falling back down to Earth. At any one place where fallout from, a single explosion is sort of being deposited on the ground, it, in concentrations high enough to require the use of shelters, deposition will be completed within a few hours. The smaller the fallout particles, those sort of tiny enough that can be sort of inhaled by a person's lungs, are invisible to the naked eye normally. These tiny particles would fall so slowly from the 4 mile or greater heights to which, they were sort of injected by, I don't know, currently deployed Soviet warheads, that most would remain airborne for weeks to years before reaching the ground. So by that time, their extremely wide sort of dispersal and radioactive decay, would make them sort of a lot less dangerous. Only where these sort of tiny particles are sort of promptly brought back down to Earth by rainouts, so rainstorm, or snowouts, which is snow, in sort of scattered hot spots, and later then sort of dry and blown around by the winds. That would, those sort of invisible particles constitute to sort of longer term and relatively sort of minor post-attack danger. So the thought of the mushroom cloud destroying everything and everyone couldn't be any further from the truth, guys. Okay. And then the second myth, and this is it really. I'm only going to give you this one because there are hundreds, and we haven't got time for that. But one of the myths is because some modern H bombs are over 1,000 times as powerful as the H bomb that destroyed most of Hiroshima. These H bombs are 1,000 times as deadly and destructive. That's a myth, okay? The actual fact is that a nuclear weapon 1,000 times as powerful as the one that was blasted in Hiroshima, if exploded under comparable conditions, it produces it's equally serious blast damage to wood-framed houses over an area up to 130 times as large, not 1,000 times as large. Okay. Actually, that was just a quick one, but just another quick one. Another sort of common myth is that there's so much food and water will be poisoned by fallout that people will starve and die, even in sort of fallout areas where there is enough sort of food and water available. The fact is that if the fallout particles do not become mixed with the parts of the food that are eaten, then no harm is done. Food and water in dust-tight containers are not contaminated by fallout radiation at all. Peeling fruits and vegetables removes essentially fallout, all fallout, as does removing the uppermost several sort of inches or so of stored grain, onto which those sort of fallout particles have fallen. Okay, so if you remove the top couple of inches, then everything underneath it should be fine. Water from many sources, such as deep wells and covered reservoirs, tanks, or containers, would not be contaminated. Even water containing dissolved radioactive elements and compounds can be made safe from just, made safe for drinking actually by simply filtering it. So you can filter it through earth and other filtration sort of systems. And what that filtration would do is filter out the radioactive particles. That's it. Enough about the sort of myths and facts for now. Let's get on to or into radiation itself and how to sort of protect yourself from it, if in fact it is even a threat. During the, I think it was the threats to the UK video that I would have done. We talked about those different threats, and we spoke in particular about tactical nukes, the types and possible sort of counterforce and counter value targets here in the UK. If you haven't seen that session yet, you're probably definitely you're gonna be better off watching that before this one. Firstly, it is guaranteed a nuclear warning is going to catch 99% of the population off guard. Whether that be the time of day, you being at work or in bed asleep, the fact is you'll be caught off guard because most of you simply won't believe that it's going to happen in the first place. Okay, that's just a fact. It doesn't make anybody better or worse or anything like that. It's just the fact. If one went off now in 10 minutes time, it would catch me off guard. Okay, that's the reality. So there's me, trying to give you sort of advice, help, and support and everything, when I would be caught off guard. Okay, so but I wouldn't be caught off guard for long. That would be the only difference. Neither you nor I have experienced a nuclear attack in our lifetimes. And with that, guys, most just will not accept that it's likely to happen to them. And why? Because of that normality bias or the normalcy bias. We know no different. 85% of us are sheep, and we go through life in the system and just getting on with it, basically. So it's the norm. Or a nuclear attack is not the norm, and therefore doesn't really belong here. Not in our minds, not in our time. No, it shouldn't be in anyone's time, but it will be. Whether it's our time or not, I don't know. So warnings, either way. Listen, the warnings, you're going to be warned. The warnings come, and they actually come in two types. You've got what they call a strategic warning and a tactical warning. A strategic warning is based on observed sort of enemy actions that are sort of believed to be sort of preparations for an attack, shall we say. So, for example, we would have a strategic warning if powerful Russian armies were sort of advancing into Eastern Europe, and Soviet leaders were sort of threatening massive nuclear destruction. If the resisting nations should sort of begin to use tactical nuclear weapons. So basically, this is what we're doing. If you come to us with that, then we're going to come to you with it. Um, with the strategic warning sort of being given by the news broadcasters and the newspapers over a period of days, people in areas that are probably sort of targeted would have time to sort of evacuate. So if you live in one of these areas that I've spoken about here in the UK, then with a strategic warning, you're going to have a day or two to kind of get yourselves together. So given a day or more of warning, tens of millions of us would, you could build or sort of improve your shelters, and in other ways, sort of improve our chances of sort of surviving the feared attack. By doing so, we would also sort of help decrease the risk of attack. A tactical warning is the other type of warning. A tactical, right, let's just say a tactical warning of a nuclear attack on the UK would be received by, firstly, the highest officials a few minutes after the missiles or other nuclear weapons had been launched. Okay, so you've got no time, basically. But these are warnings. So basically, what will happen is the nuclear weapons are launched and they've been detected. Radar, satellites, and other sort of sophisticated means of detection would sort of begin to feed that information into the military warning sort of systems almost at once. So as soon as they're detected, that's it. That raw information would have to be sort of evaluated, and top level decisions would have to be sort of made. Then attack warnings would have to be sort of transmitted down to communities all over the country. Now, a tactical warning or attack warning, as they're sort of also known as, of an out of the blue Pearl Harbor type of attack would be less likely to be received by the average Briton or the average Joe on the street, because of the time. And that that attack warning that sort of attack warning is kind of recognized as a strategic warning. It's unfortunate for us. It's just it's so quick that it has to go through the chain of command before we get it. I've previously spoke about a threat sort of being sat off the coast of Britain, that being submarines. And if a missile is launched from an sort of an enemy submarine, then we, as in sort of public Joe here, are we're going to know nothing about it. We're not going to know anything about that missile until it hits its target. There just won't be enough time to alert the general public. So I was talking about I think it was chasing submarines, where you've got a 12-mile radius or boundary around the UK mainland called territorial waters. You could have an enemy submarine sat sort of 15 or 20 or even 50 miles off the coast of Scotland, Ireland, or England. Um, you know, which might sound a long time, but when you're firing missiles that travel at thousands of miles an hour or kilometers, that's nothing. You've also got what they call there is the official warning system. You'll be familiar with this. We've spoken about these when referencing the emergency alert messaging sent out across, the mobile sort of phone networks or broadcasted across your sort of TV screens. This would also include the use of sirens, siren signals, and radio sort of announcements. But I'm actually not sure if we even have those air raid sirens type sort of sirens here in the UK anymore. If we do, then I haven't seen any of them about. We could find that a detonation could happen above cities in the UK, similar to an EMP. And that would take out actually some of these services on the grid, which could include sort of sirens, TV broadcasts, and even radios. If that happens first, then you may not find out or may not even get warned at all. As I've sort of said, if and when any warning comes through or is broadcasted, most will be sort of caught off guard. Nevertheless, this is what we're likely to see. So I'm just going to go through what you're likely to see. These are the steps. Okay, so you're sat at home or you're at work or wherever it is, and all of a sudden, if you're watching TV, then there will be a sort of breaking news interruption to whatever shit you're watching or likely to be watching. You'll have a government representative sort of making an announcement of some kind, and then shortly after, guys, you're going to start to see and receive sort of further interruption announcements to all channels, telling viewers to take this broadcast seriously. This announcement it will be immediately followed by an EAS or an emergency alert system message across your screens, providing the viewers of sort of details to what the emergency is, basically. As we're sort of talking about nuclear attacks, you'll be told this and possibly how many missiles are inbound. You might even, yeah, they might even they might even tell you this information, or they will tell you this information if they've got it. And hopefully also with that, the possible targets that are likely to be hit. They'll then be providing you with some advice and what you should be doing. One of those will be, to get the fuck out of the area, basically. The problem with this advice is that, we know that's not likely to send, the panic sort of drivers, let's call them panic drivers, out in sort of mass, ultimately, instantly sort of clogging up the roads, motorways, and highways. Thousands upon thousands of vehicles all stuck in mass traffic jams. So now your only form of sort of shelter is your car. Okay. So like the panic buyers, avoid your panic traffic. Okay. You need to avoid that because if you get caught out, well, you've got nowhere to go. You're then on foot. The government will not be telling people to jump in their cars and start fleeing, though. However, when those emotions start sort of taking over, such as fear, panic, and terror, then fuck it, they're off. Okay. Instead, the government will be telling you to shelter. Whether that be in your local shelter somewhere, obviously depending on where you live, or a shelter you have sort of built. Unfortunately, now you're likely to receive a sort of timer clock on your screens telling you when the likely missile strike is about to impact this target. This is gonna this is gonna be a fucking reality check, guys. There is absolutely no way I can think of sort of softening that blow. Okay, when you see the clock, okay, and you've got 10 minutes, okay, because even if you're lucky enough to see these clocks, okay, this is going to be a reality check. Right? If you think you've panicked, um, you haven't seen anything yet. From the previous message broadcasted, you'll know the possible target locations, and that is your most important immediate impact question answered. Are you in any of these areas? I've already mentioned this, but this is where and why you have to have various sort of different plans in place for you and for each member of your family, especially if they're sort of living or working away sort of from, your home location. Let's say your home location is your hub or your base. You and they will need to be familiar with their surroundings at home and away from home. Um, are there alternative buildings that you can sort of go to shelter? And the list kind of goes on. Whichever it is, you're going to have about 10 minutes to get the fuck there, making sure you have your bug in bag with you and also a get home bag. So again, like I say, depending on where you are, I'm not going to go into these I'm not going to go into those as it like these. What I'm talking about is the sort of bug in, bug out, and the get home bag. So I'm not going to go into those too much because we're talking about warnings. If there are any further messages to notify the public about, the emergency alert system will update you, whether that be the launching of additional missiles or further advice. The government will continue to sort of broadcast these messages sort of throughout this time and following the strikes if they can. That is it. And what I mean, can they continue to broadcast the messages after the strike? They'll continue to warn you of all sorts of things, and your immediate concern is going to be the radiation. Hence the reason for me for sort of providing you with this information today. And if you've been stupid enough to have sat there for 10 minutes wondering what the hell to do, you might find by now that it's too late. When you see, the next message that comes up on your screen, you'll know one or more of those inbound sort of missiles have struck their intended targets. Remember, guys, what you do right now after watching this video, and whether or not you sort of decide to do some research, find out if any of this bollocks is likely to affect or impact you and your family, is key to your preparations or your preparedness plans. None of this, or none of us, sorry, want this shit to sort of pop off anywhere in the world. But unfortunately, we don't, we neither have sort of authority or control over such decision making, unfortunately. And with that, anything is possible. Likely, I'm just not sure. But I'm not going to be taking any sort of chances. So that's it really on the warnings, the type of sort of scenario you're going to see. There are a couple of different types of warnings there. You're going to either know in advance, or you're going to get a 10 or 20-minute or even a 5-minute warning. If it's a 2-minute warning, I don't know, you might be lucky enough to get that across your screens. Moving on, the three things you need to always remember, and that is limit the time, meaning reduce the amount of time you spend in an area where it's radioactive. Bug out, move out, or do something if you sort of don't have much or any sort of protection. So if you don't have any protection or much at all, then just get the fuck out of there. Increase your distance between you and the radiation, as much space as possible. And then just make sure you use any level of shielding where you can. Okay, guys. I'm just going to talk about home shielding, or let's start with a home shelter and shielding. So I want to move sort of quickly onto one form of shelter, and that is your house. I'll be doing a separate video on shelters in more sort of detail, but the shelter I want to sort of cover in this session is your home. The reason I want to sort of cover houses is because it's important to include in this radioactive fallout session how to shield yourself from radioactive fallout, which includes shielding your home. So with that, we must talk about shielding. Shielding is a method of putting objects between yourself and the radioactive fallout. If you're outside when there's a detonation, you should take cover. And if you're already inside, then there are measures that you can take to sort of further protect yourself, really. Remember, guys, depending on where you live and whether or not you're sort of anywhere near a potential target, that being a military airbase or some other sort of counter force target, will prompt you to do different things based on how much time you have. I don't think we as a family are located in an immediate vicinity of a counter force or counter value target. However, the UK is a small island, so the use of a tactical nuke sort of may present a threat in terms of any fallout, really. And with that, I would be sort of looking at shielding my home. But before we sort of talk about that, what kinds of materials sort of provide what level of shielding from radioactive fallout? Depending on the type of material, and also really the thickness of that material will determine the level of protection. So the further away a gamma radiation sort of source is from you, the weaker the rays are, and the less they will affect you. Okay, so just remember that. Okay, put in things or items like, what should we say? Water, dirt, cement, steel, lead, and lots of books and much sort of anything, objects, okay, between you and the radioactive particles. So whatever you can put between in between you and the threat, that's what we're going to be talking about. So what I'm trying to say is when the gamma rays hit these materials, it's important to understand the protection factor, which is a PF. It's what they call PF, and the concept of halving thickness. So I said we'd be talking about halving. I mentioned gamma rays because they are the most harmful external sort of hazard. Beta rays, or yeah, beta, I'll call it beta. Let's call it beta. Beta particles can sort of partially penetrate your skin, causing beta burns. Alpha particles cannot penetrate intact skin. So what that means is if you've got a cut, then it will penetrate that. So gamma is our enemy. To better sort of explain this, I'm just going to use a diagram on the screen. The diagram shows that radiation is reduced in half, hence the reason why we're talking about halving or halving thickness. But in this diagram, it's reduced in half with every 3.6 inches of dirt. So the 5 layers of dirt at 3.6 inches equals 18 inches in total. So that's 18 inches of dirt, which would reduce the radiation from the people behind it by 32 times. So for example, one layer of 3.6 inches of dirt is going to have a reduction of 2 times. So if the radioactive fallout um, is sort of close to you and on, I don't know, let's say for instance it's above you, and you've got 3.6 inches of dirt above you on I don't know, on a thin bit of wood or whatever it is, then it's going to reduce the gamma rays from 32, or well, whatever that level is, down to, half of that amount. If you've got 5 layers of 3.6 inches of dirt, it gives you a reduction of 32 times. If you've got 9 layers, so what we're looking at, actually, let's just come up. I've got the wrong. Sorry, that was the wrong diagram. The 3.6 inches of dirt you can see there, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 layers. Okay, so the radioactive material gamma rays, 32 gamma. So this diagram is based on 32 gamma rays hitting a earth wall, shall we say. Um, it's going to reduce it by half, and then half of those gamma rays, so that's going to be 16 gamma rays, is then going to go through to the next, and then so forth. So what it's doing is it's halving it every time. Okay, if you've got 12 layers of 3.6 inches of dirt, that's giving you a reduction of 4,096 times. Okay, so it's completely protecting you basically. I've mentioned shielding with earth packed sandbags. But what other materials sort of act as sort of good shielding products? I'll provide you with the halving thickness of these materials as well. We already sort of know the halving thickness of packed earth and soil is 3.6 inches. So starting at the top though, we have iron or steel with a halving thickness of 1.8 centimeters. Okay, so if you got 32 gamma rays hitting uh, a, a steel sheet, then it's going to knock that from 32 gamma rays to 16 gamma rays um, straight away, pretty much. Bricks provide a halving thickness of 5.1 centimeters or 2 inches. So if you are behind a wall and 32 gamma rays hits that wall, then if you're sat on the other side of it, you're going to get 16 gamma rays. Concrete offers 5.6 centimeter sort of halving protection. So bricks are better than concrete, believe it or not. Dirt, as we know, is 3.6 inches or 8.4 centimeters. So we just spoke about that on that previous diagram. Then we have ice. The halving thickness of ice is 17.3 centimeters thick. So, you'd have to be behind 17-centimeter thick igloo. Let's say, for instance, you're in an igloo and the radioactive particles falls on top. It needs to be 17.3 centimeters thick for you to receive 16 gamma rays instead of 32. Hopefully that makes sense. Closely followed by wood, which offers a halving protection thickness of 22.4 centimeters or 8.8 inches. So you can see, guys, there's different materials here that offer different protection levels, and obviously metal is better than wood. And then finally, in this list of sort of common shielding materials, snow. You would need 20 inches of snow between you and the gamma rays just to sort of half its strength. So 32 sort of gamma rays would be reduced to 16 gamma rays behind 20 inches of snow. So just to sort of give you an example here, you have built a shelter in your garden above ground. You have made it out of building bricks, 1 brick thickness to start. Then you sort of build an outer wall with a 2 centimeter sort of cavity sort of between each wall. When you have sort of finished both the outer wall and the inner wall, brick walls, you decide to slide a 1.8 centimeter iron or steel metal sheet into the cavity between the internal and external wall. If 32 gamma rays hits your shelter, and you was inside, I would expect only 4 gamma rays to be hitting your body when you're sort of inside the shelter. And the reason being is that you've got 32 gamma rays will be halved by hitting the first external wall, or the first brick wall, should we say. Then that's reduced it from 32 to 16. Then 16 gamma rays would hit the 1.8 centimeter steel plate. That would then halve it down to 8 gamma rays, which would then hit the internal brick wall, halving the rays down to 4 gamma rays, hitting your body. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So what I'm trying to, I've given you an example there of an inner wall, an external wall, and a 1.8 centimeter steel sheet in between. Is going to take 32 gamma rays down to 4 gamma rays if you're sat behind it. Okay. That's kind of an example of shielding and protection. Right. Okay. So I'm just going to move on. You need to really sort of bear these calculations in mind when you're thinking about using your home as a shelter, and whether you're going to be sort of shielding at home and or sort of building some kind of sort of structure within your home or above ground somewhere, which could be in your garden or wherever. And you can sort of see why halving doesn't really have to sort of come into these calculations when you're in a basement or a shelter underground. You only have really, you've only got to apply the halving to materials that are going to be above your heads. Because when you're in a basement, you're surrounded by 5 walls or 5 surfaces. That's the 4 walls and the floor. It's thick earth. So, the radioactive, particles, material or whatever is not getting through that. So what I'm trying to say is, if you're in a basement, you just be aware and conscious of your shielding above your head. Okay, even if you've got a house above you. Right, I'm just going to move on. Um, One of the most important sort of pieces of information you'll ever receive in relation to radioactive fallout, and it is this, okay? If you've forgotten what I've said already and you forget about the rest of it, just remember this piece of information I'm going to give you now. If the radioactive level 1 hour after detonation was at 1000 rads, then the time it takes for radioactive decomposition to reduce and decay is relatively quick. Okay. As you can see from the diagram, after 7 hours from detonation, the rad level would have reduced from 1000 to just 100 rads. And after 14 hours, it would have reduced down to 43 rads. So that's after 14 hours, that's reduced from 1000 rads. That's the level, that's the intensity of the radioactive particles down to just 43. Or after 48 hours, which is 2 days, your rad levels would be around about 10 rads. So hence the reason why you need to be prepared, or well, you need to be prepared to sort of shelter for a minimum of 72 hours, giving the sort of the radiation a chance to sort of decay again, depending on the levels and where you are and stuff like that. But what I'm trying to say is these myths, okay, when a nuclear bomb goes off, we're all doomed. Okay, couldn't be any further from the truth. Okay, understand these metrics, and then you'll just see really the seriousness of it. If you are in ground zero when something like this detonates, then you're stuffed. Okay, it doesn't matter who you think you are or what you've got in place or whatever. You're done unless you're, a few 100 feet below ground, in some concrete, reinforced bunker somewhere. Let me just sort of say this again, okay? The radioactive level on the particles in the fallout clouds, and the levels of it, it's just not going to last long. Okay, it's going to come down a lot, significantly over 2 days. So, when we look at this, all of a sudden, a nuclear attack isn't as bad as many sort of believe it to be. However, the radiation is still, going to have affected sort of many people closer to ground zero, obviously. It all depends on the missile warhead yield, that's being the size, and also how many missiles have landed. On top of that, we're going to have rivers, reservoirs, and other water facilities contaminated, as we have farmers' fields and possibly livestock are going to be contaminated, possibly. So the impact on the food chain is there. So when we talk about a nuclear attack, we're not just talking about the detonation of the missile. We're talking about the shit that comes afterwards. Guys, I'm not here to sort of promote the use of nuclear weapons, but what I want to do is just educate some of you on some of the facts and some of the metrics, so that if I'll say in capital letters, sort of, if this happens, then your levels of panic would hopefully be lower with the understanding of actually, what is happening. You need to understand what is happening at that time. Also, sort of ensuring that you understand that, yes, the threat is real and it's dangerous, but understand that the threat and the threat levels are to you and your family. So, you just need to be able to better prepare for such threats. Okay. So the more knowledge you've got about these threats, the better prepared you're going to be. If you are not living in an immediate sort of impact or danger area, and you can shield yourself at home in part or fully, and you have food and water supplies for a couple of weeks, then you would have definitely increased your chances greatly. But ideally, you'll need to be a little more prepared than that. Getting through the initial fallout phase might be okay for you, but you need to understand the afterwards phase as well. Like I say to you. I won't go into that now. And, maybe I can sort of do a separate video actually on that for another time. It's just that if we start talking about, what comes afterwards, then we could be here for another hour. Um, let's get the important stuff out of the way first. Once we have the shielding out of the way, we'll look at these numbers in terms of danger. As there's no point in me sort of giving you these numbers if you don't know what any of them mean, or how sort of harmful, or what is the threat to you. Moving back over to your house, I have no idea what your house is built of. I do know that older houses seem, certainly in the UK, this is older houses sort of seem to be more solid than that of the new builds of today. Walls seem to be thicker in older houses, and it's a fucking nightmare hanging pictures on those walls. Are you living in a detached, semi-detached, or terraced home? This matters because you're either, going to have more or less external walls to your home. And it's those external sort of walls you want to be sort of nowhere near. A mid-terrace is going to have a neighbour or a neighbouring sort of house either side of it. So the thickness of the shielding there is better than, just an external or an externally facing wall. If you have a basement, then this is probably going to be the best option for you to set up your shelter. You're effectively below, sort of below ground level, giving you more protection. I'm not going to go into sort of shelters here, as we're going to be sort of talking about shielding your home. Your external walls are going to be sort of made of concrete or bricks, and breeze blocks if you're sort of living in a house in the UK, across and also across most of sort of Europe as well. So straight away, you have a level of shielding between you and the outside world. Your weak areas are going to be points such as your windows and external doors. Obviously, that's not brick and that's not concrete. So that being your front door and your back door and all of the windows in your house. I have mentioned that I've been sort of thinking about building a fallout shelter, actually, but just not sure yet. I'm still because it's so much work, and I'm still sort of deciding on it. When I've done an assessment on the possible sort of threats and levels or strength of radioactive sort of fallout, then I'm not sure whether my shielded home would be enough protection, or am I still, going to have to sort of build some kind of den type shelter in the lounge in the house as well. And this is why, I've sort of looked at other sort of buildings for fallout purposes only. This would mean that I would sort of bug out to this preferred building, reside in it with my family until the levels of radioactive particles from the fallout deposition and have sort of fallen enough to a safe level whereby going back to the house would be safe enough. Hopefully that makes sense. So like I say, I'm just looking at the options. As you can see from the diagrams, there are preferred and safer locations in different types of buildings to consider. Just remember, if you're bugging out to an alternative building, or you work in what sort of seems to be a robust, secure building, then you'll sort of need to consider what the building is made of, structurally, that is. How many stories is in that building? How big is the building footprint? So how big is the ground floor? Basically what I mean is how much or how big is the floor space on a floor? You will want to be sort of identifying the center of that floor, so that you're basically so that you're nowhere near the external walls, and it's sort of it's going to be, if you're in an office block, it's going to be your windows, but your ground floor doors and your external windows, you need to be away from those. So you need to be in the center of the building. Another thing to bear in mind in an office building or work, someone there should be familiar with contamination procedures, in that someone should be sort of taking charge of everything in the building, the movement and placement of people remaining in the building, turning off air conditioning, blocking off vents, and a whole list of other sort of precautionary tasks that one would need to sort of follow. It could be that you have either an above ground or an underground shelter somewhere that you can sort of get to before the shit hits the fan. There will be many sort of different aspects to consider when building these expedient shelters, which we'll sort of cover in another video. That will be the shelter sort of overview. Your assessment, and listen, guys, if any of this is important to you, then just go through these sort of simple 8 points over the weekend. and get these calculations sort of logged on paper just for your own sanity. Okay, these are the 8 things that I would urge you to go and do after watching this video. Firstly, you don't have to do them all. It depends on some factors here. Firstly, you need to identify the closest targets to your home. These are counterforce and countervalue targets. I have already provided the UK viewers, or not the UK viewers, like the viewers living in the UK, with 40 possible targets on in the UK. So I've already put the video out there. Based on where you live, you need to run some simulations on those targets using Nuke Map, making sure you're factoring in the prevailing winds for that area. What would the impact be from an airburst detonated above the potential target in your surrounding area, if there are any, and what is the risk? Then do the same analysis for a ground burst and calculate the threats from the fallout, again, considering the prevailing winds. If there is a threat, what are or RAD levels are we talking about? What would be the radioactive levels on the debris and the particles traveling in the fallout cloud? Now, listen, guys, you on Nuke Map, it will give you all of this information. Assess and calculate the RAD levels with those exposure levels to the human body. Then assess what level of protection, shield, or protective shielding you would need to apply at your home or your shelter to protect yourself and your family from this RAD level. Okay. You should now have the result. Are you sort of safe staying in your home if shielded, or should you definitely be considering an alternative sort of shelter option, whether that be a shelter at home or an alternative sort of building somewhere else? I would also simulate the same detonations closest to home, but this time just change the wind direction, and then just sort of make sure new calculations on RAD levels, risks and threats to you are sort of logged. Okay. I'm not sure how sort of guaranteed our bug out locations are. I've got 2 locations. I need to further investigate these. If they're not guaranteed, then I'm just going to have to find some others, or just sort of consider, like I said a couple of minutes ago, digging a fallout shelter at home. The latter would be more convenient. So having a shelter in my back garden would be more convenient. It's the work that's needed to get that shelter done. But then, like I say, and it's not just the work; it's going to be the money and the time to invest in that project. It might be easier, really, just for me to find a building acting as a sufficient sort of shelter and just reside in that until it's safe to sort of return home. Remember, those RAD levels are not going to be around at those levels for too long. Just one point though, that's only if we're talking about one, let's say tactical nuke, or one, one detonation somewhere. If you've got 3, 4, 5 in the area, then those levels are going to be, well, the damage is going to be a lot higher. The levels are going to be higher. That means then that you're going to need to stay protected for longer. Okay. I just want to quickly just give you a quick overview of my shielding plan. Basically, this is my home shielding. So before I sort of go any further, I'm just going to sort of go through that with you from the very beginning. It'll only take a couple of minutes. So for me, to get an idea of what I should or shouldn't be doing in terms of sort of shielding my home, I couldn't find sort of much information out there at all on either YouTube or anywhere else. With that in mind, when I'm in the position to sort of purchase all of the items needed for me to sort of shield this home, I'm gonna do a session showing you guys what I bought, why I bought it, and how it all fits into the plan. I've looked at the structure of the house, and we actually are living in a mid terrace, which means straight away we have neighbours either side of us. And the house was built, or these houses were built in the 1950s, or between 1950 and 1966, with solid internal concrete walls and a thick brick external walls. With that, these are my pinch points: the front of the house, the back, and also the roof. Those are the areas of concern. And with that, I've looked at the front and back doors, as well as all of the windows being vulnerabilities here. This is where the earth-filled sandbags come into play, to plug those sort of recesses as much as possible. Basically, what we would do is I'm gonna get the sandbags. I've calculated how many I need. We're going to fill them with earth and mud packed in from the garden, and we're actually going to tie them off and then stack them in the garden. So these sandbags will already be sort of done. So all we need to do is just move them into the recesses of the windows recess, and also the recesses of the doors. We have a chimney, which is a massive exposure. So when I have the money again, I'm going to get that filled as the chimney. I mean, the chimney's been decommissioned anyway, or the fire has, so it's no longer in use. We have a couple of external fans, ones that blow out air, sort of from inside out. That's one in the kitchen and another one in the bathroom. So they're vulnerabilities. I'm not gonna sort of remove them, but instead I'd like to sort of get them sort of replaced with a better sort of product, something more solid and more sort of powerful. I also want to create shielded covers for those sort of extraction fans. So they're sort of covers that go on the outside of the house over the fans. Um, so if there is no electricity or it's a grid down, then the fans are at least sort of protected to a certain degree. My biggest challenge by far is the roof. Radioactive fallout could and most likely sort of would settle on our roof, which to be fair is actually quite thin. We then have the loft space, which is relatively clear. So then we have our ceilings in the bedrooms, which again, to be fair, are quite thin. When I say thin, I mean they're not concrete floors or anything like that. And this is why, your vulnerability when in a basement is also really going to be in the sort of 9 times out of 10 is going to be above you, with the radioactive sort of penetrating through the roof, thin floors, and then onto your heads. And this is also the reason why when building a makeshift den in your sort of lounge or wherever that might be, you're making sure that you throw mattresses and anything else on top of that on top of that den to shield shield you, basically, you and your family whilst you're inside it. I've also seen that very thick industrial PVC sheeting can be placed or taped to your windows, acting as a shielding. Again, there's just not enough information out there to, confirm any of this. However, I will be sort of taping PVC up to the windows and doors first, and then what I'll do is I'll follow this by using the sandbags. So the PVC will be put up, and then the sandbags will go in afterwards. I suppose, to sort of prepare for this, I want to sort of be calculating how many sandbags I need, which I have. Um, but until you've kind of, until you've filled them all with earth, it's hard to sort of calculate. So I've sort of measured them all. I've measured all the windows and the doors, looked at the sandbag sizes, and then just made a calculation on how many I'd need really for those recesses. When I can afford it, I'll purchase the sandbags and I'll just fill them, get them packed, and then they'll be in the garden ready to go. I've also surveyed the house and I've looked inside and out, seeing if there were any holes, cracks in the roof, in the walls. You've got pipes, coming from outside in or inside out from the bathroom and the kitchen and stuff like that. I've also sort of checked in other areas for drafts, any breezes or anything like that. So any holes or cracks, they're going to be filled, because they should be anyways, regardless of shielding. So we'll get the filler out and the can foam as sealants, and we'll just use them. And that's pretty much it for my sort of plan on shielding my home for now. It's just quick and it's kind of easy-ish, and really, like I say, that's going to change. It's just at the moment that is it, because there's no other recommendations out there really. Like I say, the roof is the biggest concern sort of for me, and I just want to look at sort of different options. I don't know what to do about the roof. We could, go down the lines of sort of insulating the roof better, which, that's not going to be cheap. I could put some levels of shielding across the entire footprint of the house in the loft. Again, that is an expense I can't afford right now. I'm still not sure, how much radiation can penetrate in terms of, the time over material, really. Remember, radiation sort of weakens the moment it's sort of released into the atmosphere following a detonation and does so quickly. If you're far away enough from the detonation and it's going to take a few days for the radioactive cloud to sort of reach you, then the strength of that radiation or the radioactive particles is going to be nowhere near as bad. We're nearly there, guys. Just a quick bit on the personal protection. So, being ex-forces, I know what it's like to walk into a gas chamber with a protective suit on and also a gas mask. The chamber is full of CS gas, and you're told to do some press ups and some burpees and some sit ups. And once done, you stand up, and the training staff tell you to take off your mask. They leave you stood there for 5 or 10 seconds before asking you your name, your rank, your number, your mother's maiden name, and any other bullshit questions they want to sort of ask you until you just take a big breath in and sort of inhale a shitload of CS gas. I was injured during training, and when fixed, I was back trooped and had to do this exercise again. So I ended up doing this gas chamber exercise twice. At least I knew what to expect the first time round, or the second time round, sorry. Our personal protection against any such contaminant was our NBC suits and a gas mask. Military grade S10s and GRSs, sorry, capable of protecting you from radioactive particles and many other hazardous sort of materials as well. So I've thought about this a lot over the last couple of years. And when I was working sort of 6 months ago, I decided to purchase five GSR gas masks with one set of filters each and five NBC suits, one set for each member of the family. And um, they weren't cheap. But I was thinking the other day, can you imagine the value of these masks and suits during a nuclear related SHTF scenario? Those filters for the GSR should last you between 30 to 40 hours. That's 30 to 40 hours constantly out in the open, with a contaminant in the air. Depending obviously on the strength of the contaminant, the value of those masks and suits during any such SHTF situation is just going to be priceless. If you knew that there was, I don't know, a fallout cloud on its way, and you haven't got time to sort of prepare or build a shelter and just want to sort of get out of the area, then these suits and masks are going to provide you with 40 hours of life. And you can't put a price on that. Just think about this. You're sat in your house and you're definitely sort of going to get caught out by this fallout cloud. Okay, so you're sort of sat there and you're thinking, right, I haven't got time, or we haven't got time. But you need, right. Let's just say, for instance, you're there's you and your missus, and you need to walk 15 miles to a safe place that you have in the countryside somewhere. You can't use your car because you have no petrol. No stations are open, and you have no choice but to walk. And it's going to take you around 5 to 6 hours to walk if you're walking at an average speed of 3 miles per hour. What you do know is that the fellow across the road from you has two spare masks and two spare suits. He doesn't need them because him and his partner have a shelter. All you have is in your house of any value is 4 1 kilogram bars of solid gold in your safe. Now, let me ask you this question. Would you swap the four bars of gold for those two gas masks and suits? Your answer is going to be yes. If there are no other options, I had if I had the gold and I needed the masks and the suits to get to a safe place, then I'd give 10 bars of gold if it's a matter of life and death. By the way, each one of those 1 kilogram bars of gold, I think today's worth around about £61,480. That's UK pounds. But money becomes worthless during an SHTF situations, especially when it's a matter of life and death. So, this additional level of protection, that being your personal protection, helps you in many, many ways. If you need to sort of go and get firewood to fuel your sort of wood stove, so that you can either sort of keep warm or heat up your food, um, then you could just put on your suit and your mask and go outside. If, like the gold bullion dealer, you needed to get, I don't know, out of the area to somewhere safer, then you can. The only restrictions you will have is your 40 hours on sort of one set of filters. So I'm going to purchase more filters when I can afford it. If money is no object, guys, then I would definitely recommend you to sort of purchase this kit if you can. I bought mine a lot. I bought all of this actually on eBay. Masks are anywhere between 100 and 400 pounds. The difference in the price will be whether or not you just sort of just get the mask, and whether there are sort of any filters included, a carry case, and certain other sort of accessories. These masks come in different sizes, four different sizes actually. So just make sure that when you're purchasing them, you check them the sizes before committing, to the purchase. Filters are sold in pairs for the GSR gas mask, which is military grade. It's a military grade gas mask. You can see it on the screen there. There's a set of filters already on the mask, and there's a new pack there. Um, like I say, those filters come in pairs, and they will cost you about £25 for a pair of filters. So that's £25 for 40 hours of life. Okay, I'll say that again. That's £25 for an extra 40 hours of life. You can walk around outside, okay, with these suits on and the protective gear and these masks. That's the reality of it. So if you need to get out of the area and it's going to take you 20 hours to walk it or whatever it is, once you've got your mask, that's £25. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is, you can't put a price on this stuff if you are in an SHTF situation. And remember, £25 for 40 extra hours of life outside or inside, depending on where you are. There isn't sort of too much to say about the suits, guys, really. They are relatively cheap at around about £30. That's for a trouser and jacket set. Again, these come in different sizes and also different ages, meaning different eras. Not, I don't mean that they're different sizes, for obvious reasons, but ages. There are suits available to buy from the 1980s, so just be mindful of how old these suits are. They will be vacuum packed, or yeah, like you see on the screen. That's our NBC suits for each member of the family, vacuum packed. But even from the 1980s, if they haven't been used, they're still vacuum packed. But if you you really want to get them as new as possible if you can, but just obviously keeping in mind the price. You're also going to need NBC boots or shoe covers, and also gloves. So the boots and the covers will be sort of made of a rubber material, and the gloves are normally elbow length and black in color, both of which are quite cheap. Your suits, they can be washed, but you don't really want to be sort of washing them more than 10 times. At that stage, you'll probably want to be using a new suit. So the boots and gloves will last forever. You'll only sort of need one sort of pair of them each. Then you'll want to look at decontamination kits, but I'm not going to go into them on this session, as I've been sort of going on for a bit really, and we can sort of cover that in. I'm going to be doing a session on medical and medication video, so decontamination sort of kits and medications seems appropriate for that session. So we've covered a little bit about the shielding of your home and the materials to use and the halving process. We have looked at personal protection. If you want to sort of go down that road, honestly, it's more of an extra precautionary layer of protection, and it sort of just gives you that additional option really, or additional options. You could effectively sort of sit in your house with your masks and suits on, I don't know, for 2 to 4 days. I know that's going to be uncomfortable, but if you're in a house that's got no shielding at all, then you're going to survive. It's going to be uncomfortable, like I say, and logistically difficult, but it's a matter of life and death. So that's it on those suits, guys. This is the last bit, okay? This is going to be the last bit, kind of. We're going to talk about quickly dose meters. The reason why this is going to be quick is because I just don't know enough about these things. Another item, really, or principle, we'll need to sort of be looking at is these radioactive detectors. Detectors. If you're sheltered at home in a bunker or a shelter somewhere, then you're going to need to know whether or not it's safe to go outside for you and your family or any family members. If you have prepped your communication package, which should include some form of sort of AM or FM radio, then you should be sort of keeping an up-to-date tab on the news. Or you might sort of simply be sort of updated via, I don't know, TV emergency broadcast. Either way, those news updates are probably not going to be able to tell you what the radioactive levels are sort of outside your front door until the government can sort of put boots on the ground and go testing levels themselves. Fortunately or unfortunately, there are radioactive detectors on the market that allow you to sort of detect radiation. Unfortunately, though, those devices are not cheap. So I'm going to cover a couple of them here. Now, I'm not going to talk about them actually. I'm just showing you them. But we'll also sort of look at how you can make your own dose meter. I've gone through the instructions on sort of how to make one of those, and I'm actually definitely going to give that a go. It actually looks quite good, like quite interesting to make. And if I can make it a fraction of the price, then then it's quids in really. Remember, guys, I've said throughout my videos that I'm sort of new to sort of prepping, and I just want to sort of share my journey with you, including any successes, challenges, and sort of failures. Not going to lie, but I will be looking forward to making that dose meter, and when I do, I'm gonna log it, and I'll let you know sort of how that went. So I provided an overview of home shielding with different materials and the halving process with each of those materials. I provided you with some of the details of my home, its structure, the things that I need to sort of consider and the vulnerabilities I've identified and how best to sort of get around them. Remember, guys, this is my journey. Yours and other people's journeys are going to be sort of, they're going to be different to mine. You may come up with different ways of doing things using different methods, and you may want to sort of, well, you'll probably come across some sort of different challenges. Your situation can be different to mine, so I would expect different challenges. So just make sure, you sort of try and keep us all in the loop, really. Whatever you sort of come across, any sort of advice that you have that you can share with, our audience, and that'd be bang on. Just to let you know that another equally important subject to cover, and I'm going to sort of give you some numbers here, are the radiation sort of dosages and some figures to sort of take away with you in terms of medical attention, treatment, and prevention of radiation. We'll cover that in the medical overview video. Firstly, it's okay sort of shielding your home, building shelters, walking around fully kitted out with an NBC suit and mask. But we're gonna, get a little ahead of, ourselves here. What would a nuclear detonation be like, and what can we expect? There's firstly a nuclear flash, which would come in the form of an intense burst of light and extreme sort of heat, potentially creating a firestorm. The sorts of injuries to be sustained here are flash burns, flash blindness, and retinal burns. If you're ever in a building and you see this flash, move away from the windows immediately, because shortly after the flash, you should expect some kind of blast, and you don't want to be, cut to ribbons by that glass as it's blown out. Then there is what they call sort of prompt radiation, which would sort of that'd be delivered, kind of resulting in high radiation sort of dosages close to the detonation. Injuries during this stage, as a result, are high radiation dosages, which would be sort of immediate or delayed. And that's sort of weeks and months, illnesses or death you would expect. Then comes the nuclear blast, which would include initial fireball, overpressure wave, and extreme high winds. You would expect to receive fractures, lacerations, rupture of the visceral, and pulmonary hemorrhage and edema, and expect to receive these in sort of mere moments. Then you'd expect to see the mushroom cloud and fallout radioactive sort of material mixed with debris sort of carried up and spread by the winds for miles. Delayed injuries would be through radiation exposure, potentially lethal exposures closer to the detonation. The other detonation to consider also here is that of an EMP or an electromagnetic pulse, which produces a high voltage surge that poses no direct health threat, but may sort of damage electronic sort of equipment 2 to 5 miles from ground zero and disrupt sort of communication channels. In terms of damage caused, we spoke about this during the threats to the UK session, whereby we went through nuke map simulations, but this was only an overview, and I have another video actually following this one, which sort of goes into more detail, the simulation of a nuclear attack in the UK, and it's one specific town. It's a video where we'll go into nuke map and we'll simulate that detonation, and we will talk about absolutely everything. In terms of the information that it's given you and how and what we would be doing at what stage and all the rest of it. So we're going to do a proper simulation, really. Let's just quickly talk about RADs, or our dosages to the human body. Looking at this first table, we can see the dosage, time calculations, and the features of illness received when exposed to various dosages for certain periods of time. Anywhere between 0 and 200 rads, you're going to receive a minimal effects longer term, but you're still sort of going to know about it, really. You're going to be feeling shitty and vomiting. Anything higher than 200 rads, you'll start to present sort of serious problems. You can see here that between sort of 200 and 600 rads, you're going to be ill for the first 24 hours without a doubt. And sort of following that, you'll experience sort of issues with your central nervous system and a low possibility of death with aggressive sort of right, hang on. What does that sound there? And low possibility of death with aggressive therapy. Yeah, okay. Anything higher than 600 rads is placing you into a real red zone in terms of health and chances of survival. So it is very sort of important, for you to sort of understand these rad metrics, guys. We've spoke about them in terms of the materials to use in shielding to half these gamma rays and these rads, so that you can sort of just assume, the narrow sort of peripheral view in applying the blinkers as such, and just, reside into the fact that, it's all over. Okay, I don't want that happening. If you understand these metrics and these numbers, then it just helps you to better understand your chances. So no bullshit though. If you're anywhere near ground zero, then your chances will be greatly reduced, and you're probably going to wish that it was all over quite quickly. Harsh as that may sound, I'm not here to sort of bullshit you, because this is not a bullshit channel. If we can't be honest, or you're not comfortable with with it, then can I just sort of suggest that you just stop watching these videos, because we will be talking about real world and not that normalcy bias or that NPC world stuff. You can prevent many of these impacts from happening through shielding. That's shielding your home, making sure that you have a bug out plan if needed. You have prepared your preps, ensuring that you have enough water, food, and stocks to get you through the first few weeks, if possible. You have made sure that you're in good health before the SHTF scenario, and you have a decent level of fitness just to ensure that you can walk a few miles a day with enough supplies on your back to survive if it's needed. Make sure that you have researched and identified possible targets near your home. if there are any, and ensure that you do all the necessary calculations that we spoke about today, from which, you should start to be able to create a feasible and meaningful sort of plans of action. I promise, guys, if you do not want to sort of be involved in any of that panic buying and those panic drivers traveling to wherever it is they think they're going, because you will be sort of caught out, and you'll end up, I don't know, just taking so many steps back that it's a matter of life and death, to be honest with you. If you're in an area whereby you think that it's a danger or potential target area, then your plans will have to sort of incorporate that statistic. Use Nuke Map. Simulate a detonation above the target and assess the likely damage to you and your family. When simulating the strike, consider all of the metrics: the distances, the times, the blast, the radiuses or the radiation radiuses, the fallout contours, and the metrics pointed out on my detailed sort of video using Nuke Map, which is going to follow this one, whereby we will be able to sort of assess the rad levels. This is the rad levels to you in different types of buildings. You will have to sort of run these calculations, write them down, on a piece of paper, and then just create your own plans around those threats for you, your situation, and you and your family. But I'll show you how to do that. 4 out of the 5 of us here at home live at home, or we're sort of working we're working locally. My oldest daughter, on the other hand, she sort of lives and works in London, many miles away. So I'm going to have to sort of factor that element into our sort of plans. The very first sort of bug out bag that I create will be for her, so that she has, something to grab and sort of take to the nearest tube station, because for many people in London, the underground tube sort of network is really going to be one of the safest places in the city. And of course, it's a very big network, so the quicker she can get to one of those, the better. I'm not going to sort of go into sort of bug out bags on this video, but my daughter's bug out bag will contain things like a GRS sort of gas mask, and her NBC suit, and spare filters, as well as all of the other sort of recommended sort of bug out items highlighted in other prepping and survivalist sort of videos. Right, listen, guys, I've gone off track again. Just to sort of summarize on rad dosages, incidents involving radiation or radioactive material usually will require responders to be aware of the potential for health effects associated with sort of various levels of radiation exposure. Any whole body radiation sort of dose can increase a person's sort of lifetime risk of fatal cancer. As the dose sort of increases, the risk increases. High radiation dosages of more than, let's say, 100 rads can be potentially sort of life-threatening, although the risk of acute sort of death from radiation can be sort of mitigated through prompt medical treatment. So without proper sort of medical sort of assistance, 50% of people with radiation sort of dosages of 400 rads or higher will most likely die within 60 days. Right, enough of that doom and gloom, but it's vital information just to get across to you guys. I just can't sort of stress the importance of that information. I'm finished now. Thankfully, you're probably thinking, thank fuck for that. But it's just so important. What I have sort of coming after this video is an in-depth and detailed sort of simulated detonation on a town in the UK. And we will be sort of looking at the rad levels across different sort of distances, possible dosage sort of exposures when in different types of building structures, and damages caused from either an airburst or ground burst detonation of a tactical nuke of, let's say, 175 kilotons. 175 sort of kilotons sits nicely between 150 and 200 kilotons. So from that sort of simulation, we'll talk about exposure and dangers to sort of people living in towns and villages surrounding, the target town, just so that you can sort of get an idea of what that means to everyone on sort of or in sort of different zones. Right. That's far too much for me. That's enough for me, guys. And until next time, I'm off.